that down before I have some kind of input from this. The stream starting here yet, but okay. The music is way too loud. Just adjust the sounds a little bit before I get started properly, so that nobody's like missing any important information. As I am testing the sounds, I'm just gonna set the palette that I am going to be using here so that you can screenshot it, and if you want to use this palette, like not in this stream, or like if you want to use it at some other moment in time, this is what I will be using here. We can't hear you. Okay, that's not good. Let's check the microphone real quick. I put the music almost completely off for now. I'm just gonna gradually bring it up as I hear it, because I'm hearing myself in such a huge latency to preserve the quality of the stream. So I will just like gradually bring it up later. Somebody was asking like, do we need to use the same brush? Like, you don't need to be using the same brush. The brush that I will be using here is from my Angmiko oil set. I'm just gonna show this. It's Coarse canvas. Okay, now I can't hear any of the music, so I'm just adding a few dB up. So this is the Coarse canvas brush that I will be using. If you look at the profile, it's a pretty easy to use brush. The profile doesn't have any like sudden unpredictable shapes, but it does have holes in it, and this is important to remember. I'm gonna just set color as a background and start working these layers. So the cool thing about this brush is the soft look that you can get if you press really, really lightly or have the stylus sideways on your screen. But whatever brush you're using when you start painting, I recommend having a brush that you can do multiple different things with the same tool. I'm gonna set the recording on as well. Every now and then I will be quiet for a minute so that I can hear myself here to just slowly get the audio levels done right. I really love doing this, even though it's not super beneficial for any kind of painting. I'm just gonna create a new layer and just create some kind of a silhouette. I'm thinking a mountain of some kind, or maybe a mountain range. Not quite sure yet. I don't know if this is like a common practice, but personally I feel like if you use a separate brush for blocking, then for blocking, like any square brush to me is always a very fast and easy to use, because I don't really know the reason. I think with a round brush for blocking in, it's harder to make very firm decisions on edges, but when you have a square brush, then where the edges are is so much more clear to you that even if the edges are at the wrong place, you can see those mistakes more clearly. But if you have a round edge to your brush, then you have to really work at like creating those edges. And then how do you identify where the wrong edges are? If it just looks kind of okay, that's not quite the same though. Now we can hear a little bit of music, so I'm just gonna add a tiny bit more. And when the audio is working, I will put my normal headphones on so that I don't hear myself talking. Because if you ever heard yourself talking while you're trying to come up with new sentences to speak out, it's not easy. So confusing. When you have colors that are very different from each other, like far apart on the color wheel, like doing these sort of mixes is usually a really great way to get these sort of like broken, very toned down hues that are a great base for pretty much any type of painting. This is usually how I like mix all of my palettes too. I have a lot of these like very saturated colors like blue or green, and then I try to find these sort of like broken colors in between. That way they have a lot more editing room and they still have that sort of like blended together harmony with each other. So no matter what colors you are using, if they seem like completely crazy, that's an easy way to bring the color, the entire like color story of your painting into a similar mood. I'm gonna nudge the music up a little bit more. Okay. I think YouTube has changed like just how much leeway you get with this lag in case you accidentally drop the feed during a live stream, because the lag is like at least half a minute currently, which is intentional because I'm not doing any sort of like Twitch stream gaming here. The lag is so that I can have the highest possible quality in this stream. I'm just gonna look for like brighter colors to maybe block in some kind of light on the side of these mountains. Let's put that on a clipping mask. I saw that we got a new member, Akare92, into the membership on this channel. Welcome. And if you're new here, there is a ton of membership content that you can view. There are tons of member exclusive tutorials, like full process painting videos that are uncut, and then there are some videos that are full process videos where I have extra voiceover explanations on them as well. There are tutorial series, and then there are material painting lessons that you can learn to do different materials. What else? There are tons and tons and tons of art assignments that are live streams where I am doing an art assignment that is, they are always designed so that you can develop your art skills. So no matter which one of those you're doing, they're all useful. I think especially all the art assignments in the last 2 years have been like pretty much like art school. Like, if you haven't gone to art school, like, just do those. They are very similar and in many cases the same assignments that I do with concept art students, except here they are like even more well-paced. Because the concept art courses that I normally do, they're always a race against time, like how much can I cram into these students in this like short amount of time. But here, for example, the last art assignment series that we did in Sketch Club live streaming series, we did shape language assignments, and each one of those gets like gradually a little bit harder and is using the same skills from the previous shape design live stream. So I highly recommend doing those. I learned so much myself when I did them myself. Okay, now I am going to switch to headphones, but if at any point you feel like the music is too loud or my voice is too low or the music is overpowering what I'm saying, please, by all means, let me know in the chat. I won't be like looking at it every single second because I will be painting during this stream, but please keep me in the loop if the music is not quiet enough for you. Okay. I'm gonna adjust the volume of these a little bit. Even though I'm not hearing my own voice, I still need to hear my own thoughts as well, which is a whole other thing. Some like plop in some kind of lines here, like some kind of like forest foliage through which we are looking at this scene. And here I really just wanna keep things fast and quick, really taking advantage of that square brush shape. Switching to the darker color. That's too thick. It's easy to start with very thin branches and then gradually go into thicker ones. But if you start with too thick branches, erasing them is much harder because then you still have to keep with the internal logic of like the each single branch thickening towards the main trunk of the tree. Otherwise it's just gonna look weird. There is a size variation based on pressure with this brush, so pay attention to how much you are pressing your brush. And for anybody new in these streams, I just wanna show real quickly in preferences my pressure scale. Where is it again? Pressure and smoothing over here. Okay, so this is how I prevent myself from like pressing like super hard all of the time. I can relatively easily get to those sort of like maximum pressure levels of every single brush without having a death grip on the stylus, which can very easily lead to wrist pain. And if you're serious about practicing art, you are probably painting so much that the amount of painting can very quickly lead into very bad pains, like constant chronic pains if you don't look after yourself in the way that you are setting up your entire work ergonomy. And this includes in how you hold the stylus in the first place, and how easy it is to grip your stylus. Like if you have, for example, Apple Pencil 1, those can be very slippery. So instead of like getting something like super expensive, personally, I recommend just having a rubber band on that. Apple Pencil 2 and upwards, they have a little bit more matte surface in them, so you don't need to grip them as tightly. And make sure that your pressure curve makes it easy for you to access those like maximum pressure levels without actually maximally pressing on your screen. This is wrong by default on all iPads, so it is something that you do need to manually set up. I don't know for what reason would it ever be beneficial for you to have to press that hard to get to the maximum pressure. I certainly do not recommend that for anybody. Can you see how easy it is to just paint the damn leaves yourself? You don't need any kind of like stampy leaf brush to do this stuff. It didn't take that much time. It's gonna sometimes duplicate things because when a brush has opacity pressure, it's gonna very lightly press here and then harder. You can see that the lighter brush strokes have transparency in them. When you're creating layers like these, when you need them to be sharp at the edges, just duplicating them a few times and merging them with each other, that just ensures that like all of those edges that you want to be sharp, like for example the mountain range here, it is actually sharp and not unintentionally soft. Okay, hello everybody, like Hanna, the Baser, and random user, everybody, welcome to the stream. Let's paint stuff. Okay, it's looking extremely basic at this stage, so I wanna put in some kind of like middle ground elements. I think this could be fun. Like very bright yellow, not too saturated. I think that's important. Not too saturated yellow. And I'm gonna go into the middle ground by creating a new layer in between these. This is usually my light source, and here are other colors that I might use, for example, for clouds. I'm just gonna try and see how that would look as a cloud over here. As big brush as I just humanly dare to use. when working with these sort of like organic landscape forms, you want to work quickly so that you don't end up like thinking about your brushstrokes too much, because that's when you end up doing the most amount of repetitions with your shapes. So kind of like almost tricking yourself into doing those sort of like organic broken shapes is a much faster way to work. And then when you think about your composition, then you can work on those movements and directions on how to direct the eye. And only at the final stage, when you're like generally happy with what you have in your painting at that point, then you can go through your composition checklist and make sure that you don't have like repeating numbers, edges, directions, angles, thicknesses, and so on, that you will have, like especially if you have tons of different elements like this in your piece. So I'm gonna set this as a clipping mask to the body of the cloud, and just grab that second or third color to try to see if this could work as a shadow here. Just to have some kind of like variety in the sky. I'm gonna set the eraser also as a coarse canvas brush. Duplicate that and just see if that would work as a gradient. Then one more clipping mask to the body of the cloud, and using that with the light color to see if I could carve out light here, the same way that I have on the mountain. This is like a first attempt, and again, as big of a brush as I can like dare to do at this point. It's better to do big mistakes in the beginning rather than small ones and then use a ton of time later trying to like clean up your own mess at that phase. Here, fixing everything is quick because all of the brush strokes have taken so little time to put down in the first place. I'm gonna grab that warmer sky tone and create a little bit of a gradient that fits all of this as well. So I'm just gonna lighten up the sky here and in the horizon and do one more gradient with Gaussian blur. I think that's pretty good. I've been watching the whole time. Where did the clouds come from? From brushstrokes. That's exactly what I mean. That like when you're blocking in like your main body of clouds, just be really quick. Like it doesn't matter if they don't look good. If anybody has like seen my art course on Gumroad, in that art course, like I block in the sky actually 3 times, and I saved that video in the art course because I wanted to show that like if you have a fast workflow that you don't worry about failures, you have much more like endurance for failure. You can just keep going like, okay, fail, fail, fail. Just basically like throw those ideas on your canvas until something sticks and you're like, okay, this is something that I can get excited about. But if you like very carefully try to paint the perfect sky on the first try, it's also going to consume so much energy and you're gonna be judging yourself all the way through it. You're not gonna have as many opportunities to get lucky with the random shapes that you are making, and some of them are random shapes. It's gonna erase this random selection here. It's pretty much the same thing with the freehand selection tool. you have a lot of opportunity to create these sort of like sharp, jagged edges. And especially if you don't have some kind of a terrible paper-like thing on your screen, you can get a lot more of these like accidental jiggly lines with the selection tool, and they are perfect for mountain ranges. Remember that you can also add things if you just go into here. You can remove and add elements in your selection depending on how you feel about them. I'm just gonna add a little bit of dampening to some of these deepest ravines. Almost like erosion. I want one part of this mountain range to be like more eye-catching, maybe more spiky and dramatic. And one is more just like receding into the distance. It's almost like shapes in perspective. You see how quick it is to add and remove all of these different kinds of spikes? Same rule applies here. Just have a high tolerance for failure. And try not to judge yourself by the way that it's looking at this point. So there is a little bit of magic in the process, I'm not gonna lie. Sometimes you do just get lucky. But I think rather than be depressed about like how unpredictable that type of a workflow can be, I think it's something that you can feel excited about. Sometimes you do get lucky, and I think that's wonderful. Because then, if it's not all in your hands, like you're not fully responsible for everything, you are doing like thousands and thousands of brushstrokes in a single painting most of the time. So I think it's kind of insane to think that like you are gonna have like perfect designed control over each one all the time. And sometimes when you get lucky, if you have enough humility to acknowledge that yes, indeed, this was like just a lucky fluke that happened to me, then you can also enjoy those sort of elements in your painting just as much as anybody else. You can be the one that is like standing on the sidelines and looking at your painting like, wow, I had no idea that this could happen, and it's awesome. You don't have to feel like ashamed that you're the cringe artist that is liking your own painting, because it's not all on you. Like, you are also witnessing those sort of like happy accidents happening. But if you immediately feel like you want to take all of the credit for every single brushstroke that you're doing, that's a lot of pressure that you are putting on yourself. I draw a lot of clouds for my illustration. I draw many clouds for my illustration today, yes. I think clouds are also a great way to learn a lot about shape design and composition at the same time. That's why I chose that as the main method to go through my composition checklist in my art course. Because you can examine so many different kinds of shapes with just one subject, and everybody has that sort of like that level of art skill. I'm gonna try and see if I can somehow block in these shapes. Maybe first like just do a basic gradient to make sure that the color is constantly changing everywhere a little bit. Maybe I could do that same thing with this. But in a smaller scale. So grabbing some of that sky color and mixing it with the mountain. That way we can just get a little bit cooler color here. Slap it in and then use a Gaussian blur. I'm just gonna scale this entire shape up so that it somewhat covers that entire area. And then cover it with an inverted mask. So now I'm painting with just white on a black layer mask on that shape that is set as a clipping mask. And just try to look at that light where it's coming from. Just add a little bit of variety here into these distant mountains. Trying to look at the mountain range in a smaller scale. I can see it like on my phone and on the screen in a smaller scale. For you, I just wanna say that like one trick that you can review your composition is just by like scaling it down like this. But because this live stream would be really boring for you to look at in this small thumbnail scale, I'm gonna use the live stream itself on my phone and on the screen as a thumbnail, because here on my PC screen I can see the same thing in like a tiny scale, and that way it's much easier for me to judge the composition. But when you're blocking in shapes, as much as you can, like try to zoom out and use as big process as you can. It might feel like you're doing a lot of like really obvious and annoying mistakes when you're doing this, but it's better to see your mistakes than be in this sort of like iffy stage where you like can't quite make decisions on like what to keep and what to get rid of, if that makes sense. Here I'm looking at the play between these different edges, like between the mountain range and these sort of like foreground elements, where some of them like overlap each other and sometimes show the different layers in different steps, almost like building a stage for a play. And again, I'm duplicating that just to make all of the edges as sharp as possible in this stage. These yellow shapes, I think I could play around with them a little bit more. Creating a little bit of like variety and texture by just using the same layer. Is anybody here using Photoshop as your main painting tool? Because in Photoshop I had this like weird bug lately that whenever I'm using hue and saturation tool, it's not showing the changes in real time, only after I commit the changes. And since I am using Photoshop for only color editing, it makes it almost impossible to do color editing now on Photoshop. I hope that this is like some kind of bug that is like very local and specific to like my graphics card or hardware bug in Photoshop, because it is like absolutely productivity destroying. Okay, now it's looking a bit noisy, so I'm adding this as a clipping mask to itself, and then adding a Gaussian blur, and that way I can kind of like calm down some of that high contrast noise. And as an eraser, I have set the same coarse canvas brush from my oil brush set. There's nothing magical about using this as an eraser, it's just that I'm using the same texture for the eraser as I'm using for the brush itself. And in the end, I don't know if anybody else cares about this, but like for me personally, I think it just like adds a whole lot of cohesion to whatever you're working on. So I don't know if that's something that you care about, but it is something that I care about. Just adding some sky holes with an eraser on my foliage layer. And as I'm doing this, I'm looking at the entire painting far away as a small tiny thumbnail and just thinking about my next steps. You don't need to always be like pushing forward with your painting. Generally, when I'm working on a painting after one of these live streams, when I'm finishing the details and rendering all the things that I am rendering, when I don't have this time pressure of like getting something done in a limited amount of time, then I usually just have the painting open somewhere. Like I set the iPad so that I can see it, for example, when I'm eating lunch, and then I just like take these sort of like glimpses at it and look at my own painting. And sometimes I think that like, okay, maybe I could do this or that. Or honestly, sometimes I look at my own painting and I just think that like, that looks nice. I'm glad that I'm doing this, and I'm excited that I get to paint that thing later. I think that's important too. And when I'm done with a painting that I like, then I just have it open somewhere and I look at it and basically just enjoy it. I don't think I've ever seen a tutorial where people recommend doing that stuff. So if this is the only time that you are ever gonna be told to enjoy your painting, like please do. For each one of those. Because then when you can reward yourself by enjoying your painting when it's done, you want to get to that emotion again, and that will like create this feedback loop over time that you want to be the kind of person that does paintings, and you want to get back to that feeling of doing that thing that you like and enjoy. But if you are spending all of that time by doing this sort of like self-punishment, like, oh no, I'm a bad artist, I'm not at a professional level yet, I don't have millions of clients and making tons and tons of money, then maybe you don't want to be like feeling that every time after a painting project is done, you spend all that energy and then you punish yourself. And I know that a lot of people actually do that. That's what I'm saying. That's why I'm saying all of this. And of course you don't want to like open Procreate or your iPad again and get back to painting. This is a little bit more kind of like painterly type of foliage than I normally do. I think that's fine. Needs a little bit of a light though. I wonder what color I could use for that. Like maybe if this is the base color, then going a little bit more warmer and adding saturation to it. That could work. I'm just gonna set this on a clipping mask. Oh no, not alpha lock, but a clipping mask. And then just like try to create those sort of like foliage masses. There's no foreground layer like that is going to bring that feeling of volume to the entire foliage, but at this point I am just looking at this as a composition tool to frame the illustration, but in a kind of like shredded, sneaky way that it's not as clear that I am just basically creating this vignette for the composition to breathe. I'm gonna check the chat real quick. I really have to like lean in so I can see it. You don't do a sketch in advance, Michael is saying. No. No. But if there is an element that I need to sketch, like for example, if I'm working with an animal species that I haven't been drawing a lot in the past, then I do need to sketch, just like everybody else. I'm gonna put these foreground elements on top of this foliage, like double in some leaves that are also breaking apart those branches. This will take away their importance in the composition because they are quite high contrast at the edges. This is very low saturation, almost gray, so it's still gonna leave me a lot of wiggle room when it comes to color editing for these foliage masses. I can think that like maybe some kind of a gradient using something like this could bring in a lot of that light, so I'm just gonna add that in normal blend mode at this point. Let's not go crazy. In few parts over here, and then Gaussian blur it in. Just a tiny bit of light. think the clouds could be a little bit bigger, so I'm just gonna select all of those layers, go into warp, and then just nudge them bigger. I want the white parts to be overlapping with the foliage, because it's just gonna create that feeling of perspective and scale a little bit more, and it's going to de-emphasize the importance of these clouds. I think something like this as a distant layer for the clouds could work. I'm going to be using the same colors, so I'm just gonna create another clipping mask for this as well. And let these gradients really do a lot of the work for me. And then on the top layer, I can have a little bit of this light when I want to kind of bring the eye back as magnets into the edges of the composition and introduce the rest of the canvas through stuff like this. I'm just gonna leave these marks here as something that I can use later to build more depth and layers to all of these elements. Gradients really are an easy way to make sure that you are not just using color flatly. The color is always changing a little bit all throughout the canvas. And if the shapes are not something that you like at the moment, you can always just mold your existing shapes. Almost like clay. I like doing this a lot because it just gives me a lot of control over the composition. I really don't like these spikes over here for whatever reason, so I'm getting rid of them. I'm increasing this thickness over here because I just want it to be a little bit more interesting part of the silhouette, as this has the highest contrast with the cloud, so I can use that to highlight an interesting shape. The other shapes, I'm actually working towards making them be a little bit more boring. Which brush you are using? I'm using the Coarse canvas. I'm gonna just show it. This is from Angry Mikko Oils. You can get that on my Gumroad. And I'm gonna be using the same brush for the entire painting. I don't need any other brushes for this, because with this I can do all of this like small texturing, and I can also blend colors when I need to on the canvas itself. And when I let go, it mixes those different colors together. Not just with opacity, but it actually blends them together. So that way it's really easy to get into this sort of like harmonious color space and get more painterly effects in your painting. I'm gonna add one more gradient before the clouds, something that will like just clearly separate the clouds from everything else. I'm doing a huge brushstroke in the horizon, and then I'm Gaussian blurring it. The foreground to me is just like really not working. I absolutely do. I wanna avoid the word hate, but I have like a huge dislike for absolutely everything that is going on down there. I'm going to do some changes. This is a very saturated color, but I'm just gonna, as an experiment, slap it in here and see if maybe I could just have a very bright saturated color at the very edge of this hill, and then let that just like frame the mountain and then lead into these sort of like more desaturated colors in the middle. You don't have to know like where accurately like every kind of like light and shadow falls, but if you do it with confidence and then just like decide that like, okay, here is where there would be a shadow of that previous spiky cliff, and do the shadow there, most viewers are not gonna like question your judgment in those sort of things. So don't think that you need to go in and like have a whole 3D model for every one of these sort of scenarios. It's gonna use a little bit more mountain range there. Let's just see if I can do this like entire additional cliff. Now I'm not quite sure if I'm gonna do this, so I'm gonna do it on a different layer. Let's just see if that works. Maybe use a cooler gray back there. I don't think it's that bad. Also, it gives me some composition opportunities. Instead of using this at 100% opacity, I'm just gonna lightly mix it in and get a new color that way. That way I can kind of push this same color further back in the distance. Is it okay to duplicate the light source on the mountain? Well, I think it's early days, so like whatever is going to build more texture more quickly at this stage, I'm sure that I'm going to like hand paint over all of that I just did anyway. So I don't think this is the time to get like fussy on the details or precious about like some kind of a specific workflow. Because I'm just building different layers of texture at this point, and as we go on, there's just going to be more and more of them, and eventually, as I go over the same parts, even if they are duplicated parts, you will see that it's now you can probably very easily tell like which parts are copy and pasted, like just those sort of like very cheap looking duplicates. But when I go over the same areas enough times, it's gonna get harder and harder to notice the duplication. And personally, I kind of enjoy whenever I can get further faster using some kind of a cheap trick. Because to me, as a concept artist, all that really matters is that if the idea is interesting and if the idea reads. And after that, like absolutely every single method is just, as long as it's not bolted down by a copyright law, feel free to absolutely use any means necessary to get to that endpoint. Because for example, if you're selling a concept image, absolutely nobody cares how you got to that point if the idea is interesting. Nobody cares what software you used, how long it did it take to make, how much or little reference you used. Neither of those is a plus in either direction. The only thing that matters is the idea, and if the idea is interesting. Here I'm just adding a little bit of opacity variety. I'm duplicating that element once more, going into hue and saturation, adjusting it with lower saturation, changing the color a little bit. And then maybe I'm just gonna use that same thing over here. In fact, I'm just gonna create an entire screen of texture with that same thing. Duplicate it, change the hue a little bit again. And I'm setting this as another layer on top of itself. So all of those variations just got a little bit different. For here, this I'm going to change the scale and just set it here. Now I have a ton of this mountain range texture that I can just cover with a black layer mask, and then with a white brush I can paint it back in. So for this I'm going to add a mask, invert it, now it's a black mask. Go and change my brush to white, and with this I can also like have like non-fully white sections by lightly pressing here. And again, I'm looking at the tiny thumbnail sized screen to put this in an area where it just looks interesting in the composition. It's not that far off from just using a texture, but all of this texture is the same texture done with the same brush as the rest of the painting. So it's just the same thing, but maybe a little bit more unified look that I'm getting here by doing it this way. And fast. Remember, I have no problem in doing the same painting for 40 hours. I'm like perfectly happy spending that amount of time in a place like this. I can already tell that this is the kind of exact lighting that I love to paint. So for me, I'm in a no rush to get out of this place in the near future. It's only because this is a live stream and I can't be sitting here for 40 hours. And I don't think any of you would be interested in watching a live stream that would be so long. Like, imagine going to work or school and then when you come back I would still be here doing the exact same painting. I don't think people would be into that. So for this stream, I am extra okay with using whatever just gets me to the end result quickly. In fact, I don't want to get rid of that entire texture, so I'm gonna create a duplication and get rid of the mask so I can use the same thing again. I'm just gonna create one more duplication, maybe flip it vertically. Duplicate it once more. A bit darker version, less saturation. Put it down here. Into luminosity, and then just in a very low opacity, putting that texture here. I'm gonna go into scale and just see with warp tool if I could modify that to kind of go along the shapes of the mountain a little bit more and crunch down the density of the texture up high so that it's bigger lower, and it gets smaller as we go further up. All of these are also changing the orientation and scale of the little nuanced details in this texture. So all of those are also modifying the copy thing. Remember that all of this that I am just modifying, it is this part of the mountain, but now it's been modified and copied and adjusted with hue and saturation so many times that it's kind of starting to not look like a copy of itself at this point. I'm gonna do one more and set it to a lighter color. Set it into mask, invert the mask, and with a white brush I am going to very lightly brush over these areas where I want to damp down high contrast. Almost like I'm plugging in some of these holes as the light is shining on these surfaces. It's going to be like bouncing around a little bit in there. Like for example here, unless it's a very deep ravine. So that light is bouncing around here and it's making that contrast in these smaller bumps on the surface be smaller. The music blends well with the vibe of the painting. It's just because the way that I paint, like I really much like just need the music. If I don't hear the painting, if that makes sense, like it's impossible for me to get into the vibe of the painting at all. That's also why all of my painting videos have music in them. To me it would feel really strange if I just talked over the painting process. To me the audio is such an important part of creating a video, because in my mind I am creating a soundtrack for the painting, even if that's not how most people experience it. Do you sell prints of your work? Yes, on InPrint there is a whole print shop for all of my artwork. And if there's a print that you would like to get that is not part of the shop collection at this point, just let me know and I will add it whenever I have the time. Like whenever I'm adding a print, it also needs specific color correction and it does cost me money. So I'm like very willing to do prints of any work that you want. Just please don't ask me to add a print if you have absolutely no intention of getting it, because like it does take me time and money to add those in. Thank you. It's not just pressing a button, like every painting needs to be color corrected so that the prints turn out well. I'm really excited about the next video that I already wrote, because pretty much for the video production, my plan for that is to... The painting is going to be a little bit more like separate from the topic that I'm talking about. Basically, the painting process is because this is still an art channel and I am just reacting to this one tech announcement, basically, and it just allows me to enjoy the painting process more, because this time I don't need to consider the entire painting as a performance. When you're writing a script for a painting process, you also have to paint it in a way that the script makes sense, and then you have to be sort of aware of what you're saying in the video the entire time that you're painting, and instead of just thinking about the composition and what is best for the painting, you also have to do it in an order that makes sense for the video that you are making about the process. So the entire painting process becomes almost like a performance. And I guess my ideal way of painting is this sort of like just vibes, seeing where the painting takes me. I just love it when a painting can sort of like inform me what it wants to be, and I'm just here basically doing all of that stuff for it. Add maybe like some kind of a stick figure in the foreground. Oop. Maybe in the very center, just like person that is looking all of this with us. Gives a little bit more scale to everything. This is something that I can figure out later, maybe. I feel like your manager Vivi should be there to witness this with us as well. Yeah. Well, Vivi is currently in the care of my boyfriend. It's almost like a holiday from my janitorial to duties, because I'm basically an assistant to Vivi. Now I'm just getting like a whole work session to myself. I love this sort of like scumbling, like the reason why I'm kind of squinting at the painting, that I'm just kind of trying to feel where all the different details go, and instead of like trying to judge every single brushstroke in like what that brushstroke looks like, I'm trying to focus on the bigger picture of like what the collection of the brushstrokes look like. Are they making sense in that area of the painting? And I'm establishing a reasonable sense of scale with the way that these brushstrokes are getting smaller in the distance and bigger in the foreground. This almost sounds like the maze areas in Breath of the Wild. This music. I'm trying to merge things down every now and then just to keep the layers like manageable. Here I'm also scumbling in a way that not every single brushstroke matters, but the direction and the grouping of them does. I'm trying to keep that part of them consistent. When you're trying to find your own painterly style, you do have to let yourself like work on the same areas a little bit. Like just try to find that natural way to move the stylus that comes naturally to you. Challenge yourself to make bigger, longer, more higher opacity brushstrokes. I don't know if you have paid attention to it at all, but if you look at the opacity here on the left, with this coarse canvas brush, because I can access that opacity in the pressure of the brush itself, I have been keeping at 100% opacity for the entire duration for every single brushstroke in the entire painting. Just because it forces me to just make decision after decision all the time. But if your brushstrokes are low opacity all the time, then you're not making those decisions. And it might feel like you're working on the piece, but it's not really going anywhere. And what's worse is that like you can't feel like if it's getting better or not, or what even to work on. But when you're brave enough to like have high opacity brushes that are big enough, that show your mistakes, that lets you know that like not like this looks wrong right here, then it's much easier to fix those elements. But if you're constantly working at like 40% opacity, then nothing really gets done. Like you might feel like you're painting, but the painting stays looking exactly the same the entire time. Let's add a few boulders here in the foreground as well. This can also break apart the noisiness of the foreground brushstrokes that I just did. Just letting the painting breathe a little bit more. Again, just to be safe, I'm duplicating that layer and dropping on it on itself to make sure that those edges are crisp. There are also these other borders in the distance. Or are they borders or are they just forest? I haven't quite decided that yet. Get it on a little bit bigger scale. Like something in between these colors. Mixing it on the canvas and color picking it, and then getting back into bigger scale so that I can make those decisions, and then just look at it in a very, very, very tiny scale, almost like a stamp in the distance, and then just tumbling in some of this foliage. Doing it here as well. I think this can be a combination between a silhouette and then something that just gets lost as a gradient. I think that was a little bit much. And that way maybe I can blend the area between that foliage in the foreground and this element in between. Almost like guiding the eye in steps that like this is what the element looks like when you look at it closer up, and this is what it's look like when it's in the middle ground. Here's my stylistic simplification of it, and then when you just see it as a flat single color card in the distance, as a viewer you take all of that information and then you apply it to the most simple forms, and then it looks like the distant elements have way more detail than they actually do. That way you don't have to overwhelm your viewer with details, but at the same time you can convey a lot more information through simple forms. I really like the way that this green mixed with the bluish gray here. How am I doing with time? 1 hour and 30 minutes. I'm just gonna check the chat real quick. Are you using references or just painting from imagination? Like I've done so many environments that I'm painting from reference of experience, if that makes sense to you. I don't understand the layer mask duplicate technique that you used. So I just duplicated. You're probably thinking about the texture that I created for the mountains. So I just duplicated the same element until it formed this, like basically the entire canvas wide texture. And then by tapping the layer, I added a mask to it. And this mask is by default white, but you can tap the mask itself and invert it. And that way you can hide everything. Everything that is white on the mask is visible. So then I painted in that texture to be visible with a white brush on the, not on the layer, but on the mask. And when you paint on the black mask with white, you can reveal what is painted on that layer. And that way I painted in all of that texture. But I'm gonna delete this layer mask, and deleting it reveals everything that is underneath it. Sorry for going so quickly. I am really just trying to get as much done in this stream so that you can see as much of the process as possible. And what is most important, I'm trying to get to the visual impact that I am going for with this illustration. Everything doesn't need to be rendered perfectly. In fact, everything can't be rendered perfectly in this time frame, but I can get that sort of like gist of the idea, and I think I'm somewhat there. Like you can see that there is this like person looking at this like entire area that they can have adventures in. And that's already an idea that I think is usable. I want there to be like some boulders and to adjust the color of that to be a bit darker. duplicating the base layer just to fold these shapes into something that I can use. Now I'm adding a mask, and instead of painting with white, it's a white layer mask, and I'm painting with black. That means that I am erasing parts of it. Just trying to create like more hard edges, like some cliffs here. You wanna add some of those on the left as well. Maybe it's just here. That's all. And then just paint with black on all of this. And since all of these layer masks are taking up layer space, that means that I want to commit those changes as quickly as possible. So that I don't end up just running out of layers before. I have all of the elements down, because at this point when I am formulating the idea and looking at the different design options, I want to keep this process going as quickly as possible. But if at this point I would need to go into like layer management and manage my resolution and all of that crap, basically all of that would be at the expense of the idea, how much time I get to spend with like designing the composition and making the idea and the landscape and the lighting as interesting and impactful as it possibly can be. On top of these edges, I'm just going to add one more layer as a clipping mask to all of this. And think about the light that is coming from the left. It's hitting this sort of like very warm, pretty much like bright saturated yellow grass area. It's going to bounce light, and that light is going to be saturated because it's going to be bouncing warm light from warm surfaces onto desaturated surfaces, and we know that on desaturated surfaces we can see bounce light really well, and generally any light hue will be like highly visible on a desaturated surface. So that is this light over here. It's not going to be as light as the grass itself or the sunlight. It always needs to be darker than that. But it is pretty unobstructed, so I'm gonna make it be pretty bright. One thing that I like personally as a stylistic choice is these sort of like very dramatic top shadows to all of my hard shapes. So this might not be realistic, it's just a composition thing to guide the eye with this vignette. But I'm just darkening the top part as well, and this ensures that I just don't have those flat areas in the entire painting. A quick color editing trick. I am going to duplicate this layer, set it into screen blend mode, lower the opacity so that it's not completely white, add a mask to this, invert it, and now I'm just adding a little bit of light and texture by painting it white on that black layer mask. It's just going to make these surfaces be slightly more rich and high contrast. And you can do these sort of like modifications on your surfaces as many times as you like. And you don't have to paint on black or white on your layer mask. Everything in between is going to just read as a half opacity version of that. So if we look at these surfaces right here, this is before and after that tiny tweak. And merge it down. Now I have one more level of variations between those different colors. I'm trying to be careful of like not going to the tiniest brush size, because that way you can very easily end up with very scratchy, noisy detail that is not really doing any favors to your work. That's just some tiny cracks on the stone. As much as possible, I'm trying to avoid working on large areas with a small brush. If it's detail, make sure that it's in a place where it actually matters, otherwise you're just wasting your own time by doing that stuff. This works also in Clip Studio Paint. Yes, every art program is the same. Like, it doesn't matter if you're painting in Photoshop, Clip Studio Paint, Procreate, Krita, all of the art applications are the same. Again, all of the techniques are the same. It really doesn't matter. That's a good point. Just a second, I'm reading this comment. Are you adding those bushes to balance the composition? Yes, the entire bushes in the foreground, they are basically blocking in so that we are coming from this sort of more denser forest into this clearing, and then this entire new horizon of adventure is opening up in front of us. I think that is just kind of my way of trying to build up into that moment of unfolding adventure, if that makes sense. I'm really just a child when it comes to my illustration ideas. I started painting because I love video games. And yes, I'm just always building adventures, basically, for my childish brain, even today. Trying to create this sense of like dappled light that it's just filtering through the foliage of the trees nearby. And that gradient that I have on top of this layer, that's modifying every color automatically so that they don't look like they're the same hue. For the distant stones, I'm also adding another gradient that is going to make them brighter. I'm going to be using the grass on the ground. Just paint a line on the grass right underneath those rocks. And as this is a clipping mask, it's going to start glowing on top of those elements now that I blur it a bit. I don't know if you can see this, but it's just making those stones sink into the ground a bit more. And now I'm just merging all of those elements down so that the layer structure doesn't get too crazy. Trying to find a color that could be used as a perspective, color perspective enhancing fog here on the right, because I want the same type of fog to be a different color on the left. I want it to be a lot more warmer and creating silhouettes that wash away a lot of that contrast on the left side of the mountain range. There's a question about like, what do you do to take actual notes or just internal observations? When I'm looking at a scenery or something that inspires me, this might be personal to me, but I get inspired by the way that light interacts with different environments, and for me often that moment when a light is just touching different elements, or we get this sense of that there's more that we aren't seeing because the light is just illuminating parts of the scenery, or a shadow is implying that there's another element that we can't quite see off camera. Like pretty much anything that presents interesting questions, like those are the type of elements that inspire me. So when I'm looking at an environment and I'm trying to create something that I feel would be an exciting environment to explore, I am trying to create interesting questions, and that to me is more important than anything else. I feel like it's really easy to go into a mode where you're over-explaining things, and people are really good at telling stories to themselves if you let them. But you have to trust them that you don't need to explain everything when you are painting. This is now in lighter color blend mode, and it means that everything that is darker than the color gradient that I have on this layer is going to be covered by whatever is on this layer. So all of the light areas are still exactly the same as they were, because this gradient is not lighter than those parts. Now on this, I'm adding a black layer mask. Actually, I'm adding a white layer mask on which I am painting with darker colors. I'm gonna start with a gray color and move on to darker color. This means that I am removing part of this foggy gradient here in the distance to bring out some of these foreground mountainous shapes closer to the camera, and it's the distant elements that are showing that atmospheric perspective more. And that way, since I didn't start with black, I started with a gray. That means that I have a lot more editing room to move towards black and take all of that fog away in the near distance. And now it's at a very low contrast suggestion of an edge over there. And as I move darker in this value range, I can bring more and more of these elements closer. And it's generating this higher contrast area in the middle part of the illustration, and that is bringing that mountain range closer to the camera. And finally, fully black. If I just go and add fully black over here, you can see that there's a difference between gray and black versions of this. And you can do this multiple times and just have the same gradient over and over, repeating this. Now I'm going on the left hand side of this entire screen, and instead of painting, I'm just gonna use a selection and sketch in mountain range that is behind this mountain range. When you're trying to create a sense of scale, it can be tempting to think that like every element like in the distance is even bigger, but at some point you do have to decide where you want that attention of your viewer to go to. So don't try to one-up yourself in the distant mountains in these sort of situations. It's just gonna look like you have a detail over detail, and then the viewer needs to decide what to look at, and you don't want to give them choices in that matter. You want to have one thing that you are saying, and then just say that as well as you can. The cool thing about these sort of gradients is that you can just modify them and manipulate them until you are happy with the way that they are framing your illustration. Even if you are creating a hard edge, you can always blur it once more. Just think about it like clay that you are molding. This is just a very bright version of the ground color, and instead of like slapping it on absolutely everything, I am adding it as a gradient from the direction of the light source. So I am adding a mask to this, inverting the mask, and then with a very big white brush, slapping in a brushstroke far off in the distance, where the colors are a little bit more washed. And then again, adding a huge Gaussian blur on top of everything. Now the color is slightly changing throughout the entire landscape. It's never exactly the same. And even though this is a very subtle effect, since it's affecting so much of the environment, it has a bigger impact. I think one of those spiky areas could be a bit bigger. I think I could use that same texture for that purpose. Because it's almost like it's repeating the same shapes as the mountain range far off in the distance, and eventually erosion is dampening those shapes, so they start off as these sort of like super spiky hills, and then I'm getting like more and more blunt as erosion has eroded those features away. At least that's how I'm explaining it to myself. I don't think you need to be like a geologist to do this sort of stuff, but you do have to have the confidence to decide on some kind of a set of rules, because how are you otherwise going to make any sort of progress if you can't make decisions? And at some point you just have to trust yourself that like you are the person who knows how your world was formed. You are who people would ask for these sort of details. why is this mountain range here? What has happened between this continent and the next one to create this mountain range? Is it a volcanic one? Because that creates a different type of shape language for the entire area. But even just knowing that lets you know that what is right and what is wrong for your painting. And there aren't that many like different types of mountain shapes, and even just the different types of stones have a very distinct way that they are forming and splitting. So just trying to come up with like, okay, like I can't do the shape language for these stone areas in a believable way in my illustration. What should I do? And the answer to that question could just easily be that you Google different type of like stone materials and decide. Just decide. This is the material for this entire area. And then you already have a shape language reference for how to do that illustration. I want there to be a little bit more layering in this. I'm adding this one more closer shape in the environment. I suffer most of all when it comes to choosing hues. For color palette, if you're having trouble like with colors in the first place, then I recommend starting with something very simple, because it's always easy to add more colors, and in my opinion, like removing colors from an overly vibrant and messy color palette, removing colors is always harder than adding more. If you really feel like it's too monochromatic for the story of what you want to say with your piece, then like you can always add more. So learning how to do, for example, analogous color harmony, just having a very small segment of the entire color wheel, like for example, just from green to warm yellows, that these are all the hues that you have, and then learning how to use that one color and create the illusion of more colors than that, than just that one. I have plenty of videos on this topic as well. I think that's the best way to kind of like learn how to control one color, and then slowly, like very slowly, increase the range of the colors that you are using, and you can go from analogous color harmony to adding one accent color that is a complementary color from the other side of the color wheel, just as like a pinch of seasoning to your illustration. And it's pretty easy to create a very striking subject color that way. Also being clear on like what your subject color is and what colors in your color palettes are just magnets and perform that function. You can also make creating palettes that have more purpose a lot easier. How am I doing on time? 2 hours. Okay. It used to be very difficult for me to control the composition in these sort of live streams because I was so afraid of other people looking at what I'm painting, because I'm so used to just painting in my own cubicle for days before I have to show my painting to anybody. Once I started doing this YouTube thing that I actually show my entire process, it felt really scary to just show the ugly faces as well. And honestly, sometimes I don't know what I'm doing. Sometimes I'm putting down colors and paint and just trying to see if something works. And even if I don't even have a clue on like a guess of what would work, sometimes I just put down paint and trust that if I have enough variations of different shapes and colors, at some point the inspiration will show up like, huh, that's interesting. What if we do this? I don't know what will trigger that reaction. So all I can do is just lay down this colorful trap for the inspiration to be interested in what's happening here. Getting this as a clipping mask and then doing a gradient as a Gaussian blur. A big gradient. Very subtle effect. Those lighter leaves on top aren't quite working, so I'm adding the same color. And then just through options trying to find something that could work. What are those white squiggles over here? Did I really paint that in here? I guess I did. It's a bit random. Just dabbling in, it's almost like adding like cake toppings, which is my favorite part of any painting. I'm trying to find that background hill. It's here in this area. I think that could also be a little bit more interesting. Instead of a full screen layer, I'm setting down the brightness, finding like a warmer version of that same color. And then I'm gonna set this as a clipping mask, then black mask, and then with white I'm going to paint in few of the hills in here. This is going to be a kind of like subtle variety, but if we zoom in we can see that it's creating this illusion of hills that are lit from the left side. Just adding a few more layers. You can see it's very expressive. Just the illusion and feeling is what matters to me. If I can get you to kind of paint in the rest of the details in your own imagination, to me that's the ideal concept painting. If I can get you on that adventure, and if I can get you feeling like this is the kind of landscape that I wanna go and explore, I wanna take my huge unwieldy bag of treasure and carry it to this mountain to find something worth finding. This entire live stream is named with the brush that I'm using currently. So this is Coarse canvas, and this Coarse canvas from my Ergonomics oil set is used for the entire painting. So everything here is painted with the same brush. I haven't changed the brush even once during this stream. By the way, if you're watching this and you still haven't grabbed my free blenders, you can do so on Gumroad. Just input €0 or dollars in the price field and you can get that entire thing 100% for free. And I you can use that, for example, for blending colors or creating clouds or hair or skin. They're really helpful, or when you want to create those sort of like soft transitions. Somebody's saying you should add a little bunny. Maybe you should add a little bunny. I have to admit that it's kind of like not a terrible idea. I hate this. I really do. I'm sorry, but I hate it when people tell me what to paint. Like, I really do. It's nothing personal. It's just usually the way that my creativity works is that if somebody says something like that, that's exactly the thing that I do not want to paint at all. But as much as I hate it, bunny is kind of a good idea. The bunny should be on the shoulder of the guy here. Or on the bag. I don't know. Here? Here? Or here? I don't know. I think this dude needs to hit the gym and have a little bit like broader shoulders for any of this to work. I want to get like bogged down into this sort of detail since it's gonna be very, very small from further away. Thank you, Coded. Just like one piece at a time, I think. And when you're just getting started, I recommend starting from like something small and manageable and not go into like too big scenes right away. Usually if you start from something small, it's much easier to control as well. This is also why when you're painting, like, it's so easy and comfortable to zoom into things, because smaller compositions are much easier to control and to make look good. When you have tons and tons of different elements, you have way more elements to balance, and it just gets exponentially more difficult. So even if you're just painting like one plant or branch or a small section of scenery, that can be a very good way to practice those skills while staying zoomed out. Just make sure that you are not overwhelming yourself with too many things to paint all at once. Did I run out of layers? I did, so I'm just gonna Gaussian blur this to soften that transition a little bit and just merge all of those elements together. I'm also going to duplicate this whole thing and then add a small Gaussian blur to these edges as well. Just to give it that sort of like almost like a bokeh effect. Like the camera is not sharpening on these elements. Am I doing on time? I think I can still paint a little bit. I hope you're not all hoping that I quit right away. I'm enjoying this too much. Okay, I wanna add more fog layers, but the kind of fog layers that are very local and small. I'm grabbing that color, like that bright, almost gray. It's not at all blue, it just looks relatively blue. I am going to need a lot more layers for all of this. So for now I'm just gonna merge everything that I don't think I need more flexibility on. All of these elements are on one layer. Oh, I think I merged multiple different elements together, so I don't want to do that. So because this is a lighter color layer, I don't want to merge this with others because it will change the blend mode of that layer. So these three layers are normal blend mode layers. Therefore, I'm not losing anything and no editing capabilities of the illustration by merging those together. I think this gradient could be a bit more warm. Sometimes if you don't get enough saturation by adjusting the hue and saturation, just go ahead and do that action again in the same area. Even if there's a little bit of saturation, it can only multiply that amount of saturation. So by doing that same action again, you will get better, like more impactful results from that. I'm making sure that I'm using the same gradient in this corner to kind of wash away the contrast of these multiple different elements. And also the mountain range itself. Making sure that that is at 100% opacity, and then using the warp tool to adjust that gradient so that it's actually kind of creeping on this left side of the mountain range, just because that way it will like remove more of that contrast over there. Also want to duplicate this gradient and set it into a lighter color mode here, and drag it over these sort of like more contrasty peaks over here, and then find a more saturated red color. I'm thinking about the light bouncing in between these cliffs. Again, going into the same thing, just saturating it once more, and find those sort of like red hues. And now I'm thinking that the light is bouncing on these bright surfaces and then bouncing back, and it's going to be lighting up just some of those darkest shadows. So I'm setting this off with a black layer mask, going on the layer mask itself, and then painting into visibility a few of these bounce lights, and also adding this kind of fringe light to the shadows. If there is this like massive light area and dark area over here, we can assume that this light area is bouncing into this dark area. That's why I added those. Same thing here. This light is going to be shining into this area over here. So that light is bouncing on this edge and over here as well. Because this is a gradient that I am revealing, that also makes every single section that I am revealing look a little bit different to the area next to it. I think it's almost like a full circle moment that all of these areas that we have like duplicated and pasted over here, they are now modified so many times with itself so that the duplications don't look like copies anymore. Just scraping away that saturation over here. And as I'm doing this, I'm kind of squinting and looking at just like the overall values that are visible here. Hello, Mekus Mekus. No need for caps, people. I just want to say, like, further clarification to that, like, there's nothing wrong with requests or like with people that actually like doing that kind of stuff. I just I don't know. I guess I started the entire like channel so that I can do art that is not commissioned by anybody. Like, for example, on this channel, I don't show any of my commissions. It's all art that I am just making for this channel. That's because, first of all, it's a lot more complicated to manage NDAs with commissions. What can I show, what I can't show, when I can show it, like, do I need to take something down? That would be terrible with a video, especially if it has some kind of like a sponsorship on it. So it's just easier when it's just my art for this channel. And having done so much like commissions and working in companies that where other people get to dictate what I paint, when I paint, how long I can paint those things, how much time and effort I get to do for those projects. I think the big appeal for me in like having a YouTube channel in the first place has been that like this is where I get to decide, if that makes sense. And again, I understand that there are people who are just like completely happy doing art for other people. I just know in the depths of my soul that I am unfortunately not that person. Just because somebody wants to see something like, and I can do it technically, that doesn't mean that I want to. And if I'm not excited about my art, I think it shows. I think it's a completely different scenario when I'm working with a client and I am basically not even thinking about so much like what the client wants, but like understanding what their project is, who their customer is, and trying to communicate between the client and making the product that what kind of a design would make most sense. Then if we can get to an agreement on that, executing that to the best of my ability, it's a completely different type of design challenge to overcome. I'm gonna break out some of my blenders. Let's go into Angry blenders. I think soft blender is a really good one to use for these sort of things. I'm just lightly tapping on the brushstroke that I just created, and it's instantly creating this sort of like a foggy mist here in the distance. I can actually have way more of those sort of elements all around the landscape. And just grabbing that same blender brush and just lightly tapping, and it's instantly blowing up that edge. Again, you can use this at a lower opacity, but as I'm trying to make decisions here, not just fiddle around with what I am already happy with, but I am trying to progress forward with this self-imposed time limit. If it looks wrong, I can always go back. Again, remember that as a base, there is that like one tiny segment that is just copied over and over here. But this is just one more modifier that is going to make every single part look a little bit different. Does it matter that it's all the same thing? If it does, maybe you can call the art police and maybe they will break down my door and come here and say that like, that's enough. We know what you're doing. You need to stop that right now. We will confiscate your cheap bricks. Now I am creating a new layer as a clipping mask, and on this layer I'm grabbing that light color on the clouds, and I am painting light on these volumes of mist. And even these areas I can go in with that same blender and break them into those volumes. But it's not really a gradient, but it's following that same sort of like misty texture up in here. That's it. And if you want to do something that is truly cheap, you can just duplicate everything that we just did. Scale it down. Maybe put it into lighter color mode. Get a trash bag? Who knows? One man's trash is another man's treasure. So could be treasure, could be just trash. Maybe this is an epic illustration of somebody taking out the trash, and it just happens to look like this in this world. It's gonna duplicate this light effect, keep it as a clipping mask, and then blur it a little bit. That's gonna just soften those edges and make that light really sink into that cloud, just making it look a bit more fluffy. And we don't want there to be like just a huge high contrast element in the distance. It's gonna retain that texture that I just painted in, but make it a lot softer. And you can adjust this effect with just opacity. If you wanna enhance your lighting in your scene, you can pick an element. Let's say that I wanna peak those sort of like rocky cliff elements in the distance. So I have all of those on a single layer. Just duplicating them. The additive would be like pretty much overkill, but let's try and tone down that a little bit to make sure that the saturation is not too bright. And then adding a mask, inverting that mask, and then just painting in few dabs of light into where I think that light should go. If there are all these big clouds, we can imagine that some of those clouds are also obstructing the way that light is hitting these mountains. It's kind of like doubled light in a bigger scale. Just adding a big Gaussian blur, making sure that even those bright areas, they are constantly varying a little bit. And that way, the brightest clouds are brightest peaks of these mountains, they are almost blending in the sky beneath them. I really like this blue over here, so I'm gonna do one more duplication of that. It's gonna find where that is. It's here, and I'm gonna first change it into normal blend mode, duplicate it, bring it into the middle, over here. This is where I want that color to be. You can't really do this on a lighter color layer because it doesn't react to these sort of duplications, and when you duplicate and merge it on itself, it doesn't add opacity for a lighter color layer, so you have to temporarily change it into a normal blend mode. This also helps you kind of see what you're doing in the first place. I'm gonna do that once more. Runs it down so it's just like a small streak in this one area where I want to define those edges kind of higher up. And then blur it so that it goes all the way up. This way I can control the entire gradient with a lot of precision. Make sure that the gradient is changing throughout the vertical height. Now I'm merging it or changing it back into lighter color. Blend mode. And then adding a mask. And on this mask, I am inverting it. And then painting in edges where I want to separate these sort of like different mountain tops. So that is one. I am painting in that gradient, and on that mask I can still use my blenders. So I'm using that same soft blender from the blender set. And adding this suggestion of an edge over there. And I'm breaking that edge over here, almost as if that mist is like rolling over that one cliff edge and obstructing the view below. I'm grabbing white color again. I am doing another vertical cross section over here to pull apart these two different segments of the mountain range, and then doing the same thing using this blender. You can also do this as a Gaussian blur gradient, but this is just adding a little bit more dramatic texture to the way that that fog in the distance is visible. I really don't believe in that whole like talent thing. All of the techniques that I have been showing here, like anybody can do this. I think the hardest part is really just learning the composition checklist and learning to scroll through the checklist over and over in your mind as you're making these changes, as those are the ones that can improve or decrease the quality of your painting. So once you memorize the composition checklist and start like consciously thinking about it when you are doing landscapes, then it's much easier to have that confidence in knowing like, okay, like these might be like random organic shapes, but these are the right shapes for what I am trying to say here. And I have to say that as somebody who like teaches art, it's also much easier to give feedback and have a system that you can always refer to, rather than like, I like this or I like that, like this gives the impression of blah blah blah. But when you can very clearly define that, like why something works and why something doesn't, it makes the feedback like way less subjective. Like of course there are topics and ideas that I like and dislike more or less, but they can all be done technically well or badly, depending on how these tools are used. I think that brighter blue that I laid down in the beginning that created that subtle gradient in the far off distance, this one, it's kind of lost behind that cloud now, so I'm picking it up and I'm trying to crunch some of this contrast away here in the top left corner and enhance that illusion that the light is coming from the left. I think I have that color in the palette, it's here. Where are my trees? They are here. I'm gonna alpha lock the tree, and then with this color, I think I can go even brighter. Again, as colors, these are magnets. They are just something that is by itself as a detail, not interesting once you get here, but you get here with your eyes just because they are just telling your eyes like, hey, look over here. And then you realize that there's a whole painting for you to look at. I could show one trick that I used in my Colossus video that I didn't cover in the video itself because it was more about the design of the creature rather than painting technique on how I got there. And I merged something. I think I can get rid of this. And these. Okay. So I'm just gonna do a copy canvas. I'm gonna go into add, copy canvas, and paste. And now I'm going to do chromatic aberration from the middle point. Just slightly, not a lot, just a little bit. And I'm not going to apply this to everywhere. I'm actually gonna go into selection, and in rectangle mode, I'm gonna create a selection on almost everything. And then go into feather and soften that selection a bit. And then I'm going to invert this selection. And that area, I am going to turn into a mask by creating a mask here. And now the middle area is black, so we only see the edges. And if I turn this selection off and we look at the edges, we can see that that chromatic aberration is only affecting the very corners of the painting, creating that subtle shift in hues. And you can even make that effect more subtle by going on that layer and then just reducing the opacity a tiny little bit. This is actually how chromatic aberration happens in your lens, as the thickness of that glass on your camera is getting thicker as you're looking to the sides. Like, you're not directly like projecting light into your subject, but it has to go through more glass, and that creates that prism effect. And like on some older lenses that don't take this effect into account, like some people actually prefer using those sort of like older objectives with their cameras just because they like that effect. Are we happy? Are we happy with this? I'm pretty happy with this. I'm also going to add another layer here. Let's go back and add paste. Paste that same thing. And crunch down all of the values until I have just like the brightest highlights. Like quite a lot of red, so I'm taking that away. And I'm gonna change this into screen. And in the foreground, where I have this incredibly bright and saturated area, that's where I want that effect to be visible. So I'm creating a black layer mask here, and then with white I am only painting in that effect where I want it to happen, which is in this line between sunlight and the deep contrasty shadows. I want those shadows to kind of have that light be filtered through the leaves in here, and that super bright feeling of sunlight be very present in here. Are we over 3 hours yet? Yes, 1 minute. I think that's pretty good. I'm gonna really quickly check the chat. Somebody came back after a shift. I think that's the same illusion if I was doing a 40-hour stream, so that would happen. It would be like, if I could trust that my PC wouldn't break down, because it is pretty unreliable with all of this stream equipment going on at once. If I could trust that my equipment didn't break, I would love to do one of those like insane like art marathon streams that would be like 10 or 12 hours, just like painting for as long and as much as I can. I think that could be super fun. Like, I don't know if it would be super fun for anybody watching the stream, but I think it would be like a fun art endurance test for me that I would love to do someday. How did you learn? By painting lots and lots and kind of uh, analyzing what I make. Also, all of the art teachers that have been teaching me, they have been very good at teaching me in a very like factual way, like not this looks good or this doesn't look good, but the same way that I use and teach my checklist method when I teach concept art to anybody. Uh, it's basically all of the things that have been taught to me as well. So there are best known methods in like how to make art. I wouldn't call them rules, but if your art isn't working, just going through the checklist can reveal that, okay, you are breaking this rule, and breaking this rule doesn't enhance the message that you're trying to tell. Therefore, fixing this flaw basically in the composition will draw more attention to the actual message that you're saying in the piece. So I don't think all art elements are completely subjective. It's just based on like what you want to say. Okay, thank you everybody who has been in the chat. They're basically saying, I really enjoy when you explain, let visual effects fill the blanks with others. And when I see you put that into practice with this mountain range, especially that back right section, yeah, I think it's fun to create pieces where you can just imagine going on an adventure there. I feel like the clothing on this character, that obviously is like really hastily painted in here, I think the clothing of this character looks in an interesting way off for this, if that makes sense. It looks like that's a way too big of and thick of a coat for this environment, that clearly the adventurer has come from a different land to somewhere new, and I think that gives me that sense of like adventure somehow. I just want to like create my own stories based on that and go there and explore. How do you stop when there's no timeline? I think that's a good question. If I were to ever do one of those like big long art marathon live streams, I think there would need to be some sort of like internal goals that like for this next 4 hours I am working on this, because after that there needs to be this second phase. I would love to do a really super long art project in one single live stream where I can do like a block in with 3D modeling and then maybe do a line art drawing on top of that, and then take it into Procreate, create a palette, and then use that palette on all of those elements that I have made, like a really long and detailed process in like one single live stream. Again, I don't know if anybody would enjoy that sort of stuff. Also, I'm pretty sure that my PC would blow up with all of that, but it would be fun to do someday. Thank you again for everybody who has joined this stream, and I'm sorry if I haven't been able to like respond to every single thing that has been in the chat. I do have to paint, like even these 3 hours, I have to paint pretty quickly to get anything done. I hope that you understand. It's not like I'm trying to ignore you in any way. It's just that if I just pay attention to reading everything that is going on in the chat, like nothing gets done. So I'm trying to balance that. And if that balance is not always perfect, then I'm sorry. I'm just one person and trying to get better at this. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this stream, and I'll be back in the next video. I hope you enjoy seeing that next video that I have on the topic, because I feel pretty passionately about this topic because it's touching the two areas that I love the most. Okay, I'll see you in the next one. Bye!